How to surrender your worries to God and trust Him with your heart. There comes a moment in life when the weight you carry stops you in your tracks. Not because you are weak, but because your soul is exhausted from trying to hold everything together. You wake up already thinking about the problems waiting for you, and before the day even begins, worry tries to take control of your thoughts. You replay what could go wrong. You imagine outcomes you cannot predict. And somewhere inside, you wonder how much longer you can handle living this way. Yet you keep moving, pretending to be strong, pretending that you are fine, while your heart quietly asks if there is another way to live. If that describes you, then this message reached you for a reason. God is not distant from your battle, and He is not surprised by the fear that rises inside you. He has been watching every step you take, every silent tension you hide, every moment when your mind runs faster than your faith. And right now, He is calling you into a different place, a place where your heart can rest, even if your circumstances have not changed. A place where surrender becomes the doorway to peace, and trust becomes the strength you did not know you had. The truth is that carrying every worry alone slowly pushes your heart into a corner. When you try to control what is beyond your reach, anxiety grows. When you try to solve what belongs in God's hands, your spirit becomes tired. And when you hold fears you never talk about, your soul starts to feel heavier than your body. God sees all of this. He knows the nights you lie awake thinking about tomorrow, the decisions you fear making, the people you love but do not know how to protect, the future that feels unclear. He knows how loud your thoughts can become, even when everything around you is quiet. You were never created to carry these burdens by yourself. Scripture makes this clear, not as a suggestion, but as an invitation from a Father who understands your humanity. When God says to cast your cares upon Him, He is not asking you to pretend they do not exist. He is asking you to hand Him what is stealing your peace. He is asking you to trust that He can see farther than you can, and that His hands are strong enough to hold what your heart cannot manage alone. In this message, you will understand what it truly means to surrender your worries to God in a way that reaches both your emotions and your reasoning. You will see why your heart has been struggling and how surrender is not giving up, but giving God the space to move where you cannot. You will learn how to trust Him with your whole heart, not as an idea, but as a daily choice that transforms the way you think, act, and respond to life. If your soul is tired, this is the moment where everything begins to shift. Stay with me, because what comes next will show you a truth that has the power to restore your peace from the inside out. There is a reason your heart has felt this quiet pressure growing inside you, a weight that does not lift even on the days when everything seems normal on the outside. You have been trying to carry what was meant to be placed in God's hands, and the more you hold on to it, the heavier it becomes. Worry has a way of invading your thoughts without asking permission. It starts as a simple concern, then slowly builds into a fear that shapes the way you think, react, and make decisions. You try to silence it with your own strength, but the silence never lasts. Deep inside, your heart keeps trying to control what it was never meant to hold. This tension you feel is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that your soul is tired of fighting battles that require God's intervention. You have been carrying responsibilities that looked manageable at first, but as life changed, as people demanded more from you, as uncertainties grew, your inner strength began to stretch beyond its capacity. You kept moving, kept trying, kept pushing yourself to stay in control because you believed everything depended on you. Somewhere along the way, you became the one who fixes, the one who solves, the one who absorbs the emotional weight of everyone around you, even when your own heart was asking for help. And in this process, worry became a companion you never wanted. It sits with you when you wake up. It follows you into the day. It whispers questions about the future. And it reminds you of everything that could go wrong. There are moments when you feel surrounded by possibilities you cannot predict, and instead of resting, your mind tries to map out every outcome as if preparing for what could happen might protect you from disappointment. But instead of protecting you, this habit has been draining your strength and stealing the peace that God has been trying to offer you. The truth is that your worry is not simply emotional. It is spiritual fatigue. It is the exhaustion of a heart that has been trying to do what only God can do. When you attempt to carry the future, you end up feeling crushed in the present. When you try to hold together situations that depend on God's timing, you end up feeling like everything is slipping through your fingers. When you try to protect yourself from every possibility of pain, your heart becomes overwhelmed by fears that were never meant to shape your identity. This is why you feel tired even when you rest physically. Your mind has not been resting. Your soul has not found a place to breathe. God sees this battle. He has watched the way you try to stay strong for everyone else. He has seen the moments when you hide your fear behind a calm expression. He knows how many times you have told yourself that you are fine, even though your thoughts kept running ahead of your faith. He knows how often you have wondered why he feels silent, when in reality, the noise of your own fears has been louder than his voice. God is not absent. He is waiting for you to stop fighting alone. Surrender begins with truth. It begins when you finally admit that the weight you carry is too heavy. It begins when you recognize that trust is not a feeling you force, but a decision you practice. It begins when you choose to stop using your strength to hold together what has already been slipping away. Worry grows strongest in the places where trust has been forgotten. But the moment you decide to release what overwhelms you, the moment you choose to bring your fears into God's presence instead of hiding them inside your thoughts, something begins to shift. Peace does not come from having everything under control. Peace comes from trusting the one who controls everything. Your heart has longed for rest, and God is calling you into that rest. Not the kind of rest that comes from escaping your problems, but the kind that comes from knowing you do not have to face them alone. You do not have to be the one who carries every solution. You do not have to be the one who predicts the future. You do not have to be the one who controls outcomes that only God can shape. You were made to walk with Him, not ahead of Him. And the moment you acknowledge that, the moment you allow God to take His place in your life again, the burden that seemed impossible to carry begins to lighten. Your heart has been asking for this. Your soul has been waiting for this. And God has been preparing you for this moment where surrender becomes the doorway to the peace He has been ready to give you. The spiritual reveal. Your heart feels overwhelmed not because you lack faith, but because you have been fighting an invisible battle without understanding what is truly happening inside you. There is a hidden reason behind this restlessness that keeps rising within you, and until you see it clearly, the cycle of worry will repeat itself even when you try to push it away. You have been facing something deeper than overthinking or emotional tension. You have been facing a spiritual fatigue that slowly drains your courage and convinces you that peace is far from your reach. Yet peace is not distant. It is simply waiting for you to recognize where the real battle is taking place. When a person tries to carry the weight of their life without surrendering it, the heart begins to react. The mind becomes louder, the emotions become heavier, and the future begins to feel like a storm waiting to happen. You may think this is just part of being responsible or cautious, but there is something else hidden beneath it. Your soul is tired because you have been trying to control outcomes that only God can govern. This creates a type of inner tension that prayers cannot resolve when the heart refuses to let go. It is like trying to breathe while holding everything inside. Eventually, the pressure becomes unbearable. This is why the worries feel stronger late at night, or the moment you wake up, or when something unexpected happens. It is not the situation itself. It is the belief that you must be the one to solve everything. And this belief quietly steals your peace. The heart becomes overwhelmed when it stops trusting and starts carrying. Anxiety begins to grow in the silence where trust was meant to live. And little by little, it shapes your reactions, your expectations, and even your relationship with God. Instead of resting in Him, your thoughts start running ahead, fearing what might happen, assuming the worst, and preparing for battles that might never come. You were not created to live in this state. When the heart tries to control what the soul has not surrendered, you end up exhausted even when nothing significant has happened. A small thought turns into a chain of possibilities. A minor uncertainty becomes a scenario of fear. A simple decision becomes a mountain you do not know how to climb. This is not just overthinking. This is what happens when the heart forgets the truth that God has been whispering all along. You are not alone, and you do not need to carry what belongs to Him. The spiritual reveal at this moment is simple but transformative. Worry is not a sign that your faith is broken. It is a sign that your trust is calling for renewal. It is a signal that something inside you needs to return to the foundation that once brought you peace. You are not failing God because you are afraid. You are simply weary because you have been trying to do everything without leaning into His strength. When your heart tries to handle life on its own, fear becomes louder than faith, and the weight of responsibility becomes heavier than the grace available to you. God never intended for your relationship with Him to be based on pressure. He invited you into a place where trust becomes your stability, not your struggle. But for trust to grow, you must first understand what has been happening inside you. The reason you feel overwhelmed is not because your life is falling apart. It is because your soul has been fighting battles without resting in the truth of God's character. Your mind has been trying to predict the future instead of believing that God is already there. Your heart has been holding on to concerns instead of placing them in the hands that shaped your destiny. When you finally understand this, something begins to shift. Instead of seeing your worry as a flaw, you begin to see it as a sign that you need to return to God's presence. Instead of feeling ashamed of your fear, you begin to recognize that fear grows where surrender has not been practiced. Instead of thinking you must manage everything, you begin to realize that true strength comes from releasing what you cannot handle alone. And in that moment of recognition, the heavy fog around your emotions begins to lift. This is the turning point your heart needs. Worry loses power when truth enters. Fear retreats when you see what has been happening beneath the surface. And the moment you understand that your exhaustion comes from battles you were never meant to fight alone, trust becomes possible again. God is not asking you to be stronger. He is opening your eyes to the reality that you were never meant to live without His peace. This is where your heart begins to breathe again. This is where surrender starts to make sense. This is where trust becomes the path that leads you out of the weight you have been carrying for far too long. The biblical foundation. Every step of your journey toward surrender rests on a truth that many people know with their minds but have never experienced with their hearts. God never intended for His word to be treated as a distant message or a set of instructions. His word is a lifeline, a place where the soul finds direction when the mind is overwhelmed, and where the heart discovers stability in moments that feel uncertain and unpredictable. Scripture becomes a foundation when life begins to shake, and the promises of God begin to hold you when nothing else seems strong enough to keep you standing. When God says to cast your burden on Him, He is not offering comfort in theory. He is giving you a command rooted in His character. Psalm 55 reminds you that the Lord sustains those who trust Him. This is not a poetic phrase meant only for peaceful moments. It was spoken for days like the ones you have been living, days when your faith feels thin, when your strength is fading, and when your heart wonders how much longer you can keep moving forward. Casting your burden does not mean pretending you are not hurting. It means placing everything that weighs you down into the hands of the one who carries what you cannot. The same truth appears again when the book of Proverbs tells you to trust in the Lord with all your heart. All your heart includes the parts that fear the unknown, the parts that question the future, the parts that feel fragile, the parts that hide behind strength, and the parts that silently hold on to pain. Trust is not about ignoring reality. Trust is about allowing God to stand between you and the fear that tries to control your life. It is about admitting that He sees farther than you can, that He understands what you cannot explain, and that His wisdom is greater than your attempts to manage everything alone. When the Apostle Peter says to cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you, he is not telling you to be irresponsible or careless. He is teaching you a spiritual posture, a way of living where your identity is rooted in the love of God rather than in the fear of what might happen next. Anxiety grows when the heart is left alone with questions it cannot answer. Surrender begins when those questions are placed in the presence of a God who sees the end from the beginning. You are not giving up control. You are giving God the room to work where your strength has been falling short. The logic behind these verses is simple, yet deeply transformative. God does not ask you to try harder or to force yourself into a state of peace. He invites you to release what burdens your mind and wounds your spirit. His commands are invitations to freedom. His instructions are pathways to rest. His word is not a demand to become stronger, but a reminder that you are safe in the arms of the one who holds the universe together. This is why Scripture is so essential in moments of fear. When your heart is overwhelmed, your emotions will tell you one story, your worries will tell you another, and your imagination will build scenarios that do not reflect truth. But the Word of God cuts through the noise and reveals what is real. It tells you that you are not forgotten. It tells you that your future is not in danger. It tells you that God is not distant or silent. It tells you that He is working in the unseen, even when you do not feel anything changing in the visible world around you. You need this foundation because surrender does not grow from emotion alone. Emotion brings you to God in honesty, but truth keeps you grounded when your feelings fluctuate. There will be days when you feel strong and days when you feel fragile. There will be moments when fear tries to return, moments when your thoughts try to take control again, and moments when your heart wonders whether God is truly leading your steps. In those moments, feelings cannot guide you. Only truth can. The truth is that God has been faithful in every season of your life. He has carried you through places you did not think you would survive. He has given you strength on days when you had none left. He has protected you from battles you never even knew were forming. And if He has been faithful in your past, He will not fail you now. His word becomes your anchor when storms rise. His promises become your stability when life changes. His presence becomes your confidence when the future feels unclear. You do not need to see the entire path to trust the one who designed it. You only need to take the next step with the assurance that God is already ahead of you. His word reminds you that He cares for you in ways deeper than you understand. Surrender becomes possible when you realize that trust is not built on your ability to stay strong, but on His ability to remain faithful. The foundation you stand on is not your effort. It is the character of God. Once your heart grasps this, surrender becomes less of a struggle and more of a response to the love and faithfulness you have already experienced. Scripture becomes not just something you hear, but something you live. And trust becomes not something you try to force, but something that naturally rises from the ground of truth beneath your feet. There is a moment in every spiritual journey when you begin to realize that the heaviness you feel is not only emotional, but deeply connected to the way your heart and mind have been responding to life. Many people separate their thoughts from their faith as if the mind belongs to worry and the heart belongs to God. But the truth is that both were designed to work together under His guidance. When this alignment is lost, confusion enters. The heart wants to trust, yet the mind keeps imagining every possible danger. The heart longs to rest, yet the mind continues to search for explanations. And without noticing it, you begin to live divided inside yourself. This division is what steals your peace. You pray for strength, but your thoughts keep calculating outcomes. You desire to trust, but your mind keeps rehearsing every past disappointment. Your emotions seek comfort, but your reasoning insists on control. And in this internal conflict, surrender becomes difficult, not because you are unwilling, but because your thoughts are louder than the truth your heart believes. This is why many people feel stuck. They are not lacking faith. They are lacking harmony between what they believe spiritually and what they process mentally. Understanding this connection is essential for true transformation. Emotion can move you for a moment, but only understanding can sustain you through a season. When the heart feels comforted, you may experience temporary peace. But when the mind gains clarity, you gain a lasting foundation that reshapes the way you respond to fear. The journey of surrender is not about shutting down your thoughts. It is about training your mind to align with what your spirit already knows. Scripture calls this renewing the mind, a process through which your thoughts, reactions, and beliefs become anchored in the truth rather than in the instability of circumstances. Your heart tries to trust God, but your mind tries to protect you. This is the conflict that creates exhaustion. The mind fears losing control because it believes control equals safety. But the heart knows that safety comes from God, not from your attempts to manage everything. When your mind refuses to rest where your heart wants to trust, anxiety grows. It fills the space where peace was meant to live. It shapes your expectations, your reactions, and your decisions. This is why it is possible to love God sincerely, yet still feel anxious. Your heart is with Him, but your mind has not yet learned how to rest in Him. The key is understanding that surrender is not emotional weakness, but spiritual intelligence. It is not abandoning reason. It is recognizing that reason alone cannot carry what only God can resolve. When your mind learns that it does not need to handle everything, your thoughts stop fighting your faith. Your heart begins to rest because your reasoning finally accepts what Scripture has been saying all along. God is trustworthy. He is faithful. He is in control. And He has invited you into a life where His peace guards your heart and your mind together. This harmony transforms your behavior. The moment your mind agrees with truth, your reactions begin to change. You stop rehearsing fearful scenarios because you no longer assume danger is coming. You stop overthinking conversations because you no longer feel responsible for outcomes you cannot control. You stop carrying emotional burdens alone because you finally understand that surrender is an active choice, not a passive feeling. You begin to respond with faith where you once reacted with fear. You begin to choose prayer where you once chose worry. You begin to rest where you once rushed. This connection between heart and mind is not theoretical. It becomes visible in the smallest moments of your day. When a fearful thought arrives, your heart no longer panics because your mind has learned to question whether that thought comes from truth or from fear. When uncertainty appears, your mind no longer spirals because it has learned that not knowing the future does not mean being unprotected. When challenges arise, your heart remains steady because your reasoning finally understands that God's presence does not disappear when problems appear. And this is where surrender becomes powerful. It reshapes your entire inner world. It teaches your heart to release control and teaches your mind to rest in truth. It creates a place inside you where peace becomes possible again. You begin to see that trusting God is not blind optimism, but a logical response to the faithfulness you have already seen in your life. You begin to see that peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of alignment between what you believe and how you think. This is the transformation God desires for you, a heart anchored in trust and a mind anchored in truth. A life where you are no longer torn between faith and fear. A journey where your thoughts and your spirit walk in the same direction. When this harmony begins to take shape, surrender is no longer a struggle. It becomes the natural overflow of a heart and mind, learning to rest in the God who has carried you until now. Every person who tries to trust God eventually discovers that the greatest battles do not happen around them, but within them. You want to surrender your fears, yet something inside resists. You want to believe that God is taking care of your future, yet a quiet tension rises whenever you face uncertainty. These moments reveal that surrender is not hindered by external circumstances. It is hindered by internal barriers that the heart develops over years of pain, disappointment, pressure, and self-protection. Many never recognize these barriers, which is why they feel frustrated when trust seems difficult. But once these barriers are exposed, the path towards surrender becomes clearer, and your heart begins to understand why peace has felt so distant. One of the strongest barriers is the illusion of control. You hold on because you believe that releasing control is dangerous. You convince yourself that if you prepare for every possibility, you will be safe from disappointment. But this habit becomes a heavy chain around your spirit. It forces you to carry burdens that belong to God, and blinds you to the truth that safety does not come from controlling outcomes. It comes from trusting the one who sees what you cannot. Control gives a sense of temporary relief, but it demands a high price. It keeps you alert when you should be resting, anxious when you should be trusting, and exhausted when you should be standing in peace. Another barrier is the fear of disappointment. Deep down, you remember moments when you prayed for something and it did not happen the way you hoped. Something inside you decided that expecting too much might lead to pain. So instead of trusting freely, you hold back, thinking that emotional distance will protect you. But this distance does not protect your heart. It only prevents you from experiencing the closeness God intends for you. The fear of being disappointed by God becomes a barrier that quietly shapes your prayers, your confidence, and your willingness to surrender the deeper parts of your heart. Yet God has never asked you to protect yourself from Him. He has asked you to trust His faithfulness even when you do not fully understand His timing. There is also the barrier created by wounds you never fully healed. Sometimes, unanswered prayers or difficult seasons leave a mark on your soul. You may still believe in God's love, but a part of you wonders why certain things happened the way they did. These unspoken questions build walls around your trust. You begin to surrender the small things, but hold tightly to the areas where you once felt pain. This creates a divided trust, where some parts of your life feel surrendered and others feel guarded. And until these wounds are acknowledged, your heart struggles to rest. God is not asking you to ignore what hurt you. He is inviting you to bring those wounds to Him so that trust can flow without resistance. Another subtle barrier comes from misunderstanding the silence of God. When prayers seem unanswered, the mind easily interprets silence as absence. You begin to feel as if God is far away or uninterested, even though His silence often carries deeper meaning. Silence is not abandonment. Silence is preparation. Silence is alignment. Silence is God working in the unseen while you learn to walk by faith rather than by immediate answers. Yet when silence feels uncomfortable, you may try to take control again, believing that if God is not moving fast enough, you must act on your own. This reaction does not come from rebellion. It comes from fear. And fear can only be dismantled by understanding that God's timing always carries purpose, even when you cannot see it yet. There is also the barrier of expectations placed on you by others. You carry responsibilities, roles, and pressures that make you feel as if you cannot afford to surrender anything. You have people who look to you, depend on you, rely on you, and expect you to stay strong even when your own heart is weary. This constant pressure convinces you that letting go would make everything fall apart. But this belief keeps you in a cycle of exhaustion. Surrender is not abandoning your responsibilities. It is giving God the weight of them so you can walk with clarity and strength instead of living under a burden that drains your spirit. Recognizing these barriers is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to show you why the journey has felt so difficult. You have been trying to trust God while carrying fears, expectations, memories, and pressures that were never meant to remain untouched. God does not want you to pretend these barriers do not exist. He wants to walk through them with you. He wants to dismantle the illusions that keep you trapped. He wants to heal the wounds you hide. He wants to show you that surrender is not the loss of control, but the restoration of peace. Once these barriers are seen, they lose their power. What once felt overwhelming begins to make sense. And what once seemed impossible begins to feel like the first step toward freedom. Your heart is not incapable of trusting God. It has simply been protecting itself for far too long. And now, For the first time in a long time, God is inviting you to come out from behind these barriers and step into the rest He has prepared for you. There comes a moment when the heart reaches a turning point. It is not dramatic and it is not loud. It is a quiet realization that you cannot keep living inside the same cycle of fear, tension, and internal pressure. This moment is the beginning of surrender. Not because everything suddenly becomes easier, but because you finally recognize that holding on has cost you too much. Your mind is tired from carrying the same thoughts. Your spirit is tired from fighting the same battles. Your emotions are tired from trying to stay strong. And something inside you begins to whisper that there must be another way to live. This shift does not begin with a feeling. It begins with honesty. You can only release what you are willing to acknowledge. Many people pray for peace without naming what is stealing it. They ask God for rest, but they never identify the fear that keeps them awake. They want trust to grow, but they never bring into the light the thoughts that feed anxiety. The heart cannot surrender what the mind refuses to face. This is why the first step toward letting go is naming the fear that has been shaping your reactions. When you name it, the fear loses its ability to hide. What once felt like a giant becomes something that God can finally confront. Once the fear is named, another shift begins. You start to replace the lie with truth. Worry thrives in places where thoughts are never challenged. It grows when the mind assumes danger without examining whether the thought is even real. It grows when old memories dictate present reactions. It grows when past disappointments become the lens through which you view the future. But when you confront these thoughts with Scripture, something changes inside you. The truth of God does not argue with your fears. It exposes them. It shows that the voice of anxiety has been louder than the voice of God. Not because anxiety is stronger, but because truth has been neglected. In this moment, surrender becomes practical. It moves from an idea into a habit. True surrender does not happen all at once. It happens in small, consistent moments where you choose to release something instead of holding it in your own strength. These are the micro-surrenders of everyday life, where you pause long enough to admit you cannot carry a certain thought, decision, or burden alone. Each small release builds trust. Each moment of honesty strengthens your connection with God. Each act of surrender teaches your heart that peace does not come from controlling everything, but from placing everything in the presence of the one who cares for you. Another part of this shift involves accepting that the unknown does not have to be feared. Your mind tries to protect you by imagining every possibility, as if preparing for the worst could prevent pain. But God does not ask you to predict tomorrow. He asks you to trust Him with it. The unknown is not a threat when God is already there. You cannot see what He is preparing, but He sees what you cannot. You do not know how everything will unfold, but He has already written the path. Surrender becomes possible when you realize that trusting God with the unknown is not risk. It is wisdom. This transformation continues when you learn to talk to God without filters. Many people approach God as if they must hide their weakness, avoid certain questions, or appear stronger than they feel. But God does not bless the version of you that pretends to be fine. He blesses the version of you that comes honestly, with trembling hands and a tired heart. When you speak to God with openness, something powerful happens. He meets you where you are, not where you think you should be. His presence begins to reach the places you kept hidden, and the weight inside you starts to loosen because it is finally being carried in the right hands. This shift also teaches you to interrupt the old patterns before they take over your mind again. When a fearful thought rises, you no longer allow it to grow unchecked. You pause, breathe, and respond differently than before. You recognize that you have a choice in how you think. You recognize that worry is not your identity. You recognize that anxiety does not have to dictate your steps. Each time you interrupt the pattern, you weaken its influence. Each time you choose surrender instead of fear, Your faith becomes stronger than your imagination of danger. As this process continues, you begin to see that God never asked you to be perfect. He asked you to walk with Him. Surrender is not about achieving a spiritual standard. It is about depending on the God who knows your limits and still loves you deeply. This shift teaches you that peace is not something you earn. It is something you receive when you stop trying to carry the weight of your life alone. And as you practice this new way of living, trust becomes less of a struggle and more of a natural response to the goodness of God. You begin to notice that the burden feels lighter, not because everything has changed around you, but because something has changed within you. Your heart no longer fights against God's guidance. Your mind no longer argues with His promises. Your spirit no longer feels abandoned in the battle. This shift marks the moment when surrender becomes your path, and trust becomes your strength. Trust becomes real, not in the extraordinary moments of life, but in the everyday choices that shape who you are becoming. Many people wait for a dramatic encounter, a powerful sign, or a sudden breakthrough to finally surrender their worries to God. But trust is built quietly. It is formed in the small moments that no one sees, the private battles you fight within your thoughts, and the decisions you make long before anyone else notices a change. If you want to live with a heart at peace, you must understand that transformation grows inside your routine. It is not something you feel once. It is something you practice daily. Your mornings, for example, hold a spiritual power most people underestimate. The first thoughts that enter your mind often set the tone for the rest of the day. When you wake up and immediately allow worry to lead your thoughts, you begin the day already feeling behind, already feeling threatened, already carrying what you were meant to release. But when you start your morning speaking truth over your own heart, something shifts. A simple declaration can quiet fears before they grow. When you begin your day by telling God that you trust Him, even if your emotions still disagree, your spirit becomes aligned with truth. Trust does not begin when everything makes sense. Trust begins when you choose to anchor your heart in God before anything else has the opportunity to pull you away. Throughout the day, the mind naturally drifts toward responsibility, pressure, and uncertainty. This is where the practice of pausing becomes essential. Pause is not weakness. It is spiritual discipline. When you stop for a moment and breathe, when you remind yourself that God is present, when you choose to release the thought that is trying to take control, your entire inner world begins to realign. These pauses interrupt the cycle of anxiety before it takes over your mind. They create room for surrender to happen in real time, not just in prayer. A few seconds of honesty with God throughout the day can prevent hours of mental exhaustion. This is how trust becomes a lifestyle and not just a moment. Your evenings also carry significance. When you end the day by pouring your concerns before God, you release the emotional weight that otherwise follows you into the night. The mind tends to relive conversations, analyze decisions, and imagine what might happen tomorrow. But when you intentionally end your day in God's presence, you are choosing to close the night with peace instead of fear. You are telling your heart that the battles of the day do not belong in your sleep. You release them into God's care. This nightly release teaches your mind that the day is over and what comes next is God's responsibility, not yours. A daily routine of trust includes reflection. There is power in acknowledging what you gave to God today. When you write down the burdens you are releasing, your heart begins to see that surrender is possible. You start to recognize patterns. You notice which fears return often. You see which situations trigger anxiety. This awareness does not weaken you. It strengthens you. It teaches you how to meet your fears with truth. It teaches you how to turn to God before turning to panic. It teaches you that surrender is not an emotional reaction, but a practiced response. As trust becomes part of your daily rhythm, your behavior transforms naturally. You begin to think differently. You make decisions without the same pressure. You walk through challenges without the same fear. You face uncertainty without falling apart internally. The people around you may not understand how you stay calm in such unpredictable times, but your peace does not come from pretending. It comes from practicing trust over and over until it becomes your default response. The more you walk in this rhythm, the more you notice that worry loses its voice. Thoughts that once controlled you become weaker. Old habits of fear begin to dissolve. When a negative thought rises, you no longer let it take over. You question it. You confront it. You hand it to God. Your mind stops believing that the worst will happen because your heart has learned that God is good. Over time, your emotional reactions begin to change. You stop expecting disappointment and start expecting God's faithfulness. You stop assuming danger and start believing in God's protection. You stop living as if you are alone and start walking as if you are supported. This daily practice is not about perfection. There will be days when fear returns and days when trust feels more difficult. But the difference now is that you know where to go when the pressure rises. You know how to realign your mind with truth. You know how to quiet your heart in God's presence. And you know that every time you return to Him, He receives you without hesitation. Over time, these daily choices reshape your entire emotional world. You begin to move through life with a peace that does not make sense to the natural mind, a peace that cannot be shaken by sudden changes, a peace that carries you through storms with steady confidence. This is the peace Jesus promised, the peace that surpasses understanding, the peace that guards both your heart and your mind. It is found not in dramatic spiritual moments, but in the quiet, consistent practice of trusting God with every part of your life. There is something powerful that happens when a person finally lets go of the constant need to control their life and chooses instead to rest in the character of God. Most people assume that surrender is the moment they stop fighting, but surrender is much more than that. Surrender is the moment God begins to work in ways you could not see before. The very act of letting go opens a spiritual door. Worry closes your vision. Trust opens it. And once this door opens, you start to realize that God has been active all along, orchestrating details you never noticed, protecting you from dangers you did not perceive, and aligning paths you could not have planned. The moment you rest, God begins to reveal what He has been doing in the unseen. When you choose to stop carrying everything alone, your mind becomes quiet enough to recognize the subtle ways God has been guiding you. You begin to notice that there were decisions you almost made that would have harmed you, paths you almost took that would have drained you, opportunities you almost accepted that would have distracted you. At the time, you thought the delay or the closed door was a setback, but now you see it was protection. God's involvement in your life is often hidden until your heart finds enough stillness to see it. Trust does not make God move. Trust helps you recognize that He has been moving all along. Something else happens when you release your worries. God begins to align what you tried to control in your own strength. You cannot see every detail He orchestrates, but you start to notice a quiet order forming in places that once felt chaotic. Conversations shift, opportunities appear, the right people come into your life, situations that seemed impossible begin to soften, dreams you buried begin to stir again. This is not coincidence. This is the evidence of a God who works in ways that surpass your understanding. When you surrender, you are not giving up. You are giving God room to do what only He can do. There are times when God works silently, not because He is far away, but because He is working deeply. Some of His greatest answers do not arrive with noise. They unfold slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. When you learn to rest in Him, you begin to recognize these gentle changes. You see how God heals your heart in layers. You notice how your thoughts become calmer. You feel how your reactions soften. You realize how your fears loosen their grip. This kind of healing does not come from time alone. It comes from surrender. Time may pass, but only God can restore what worry has damaged inside you. God also works in the places you cannot access. While you sleep, while you rest, while you wait, He moves in conversations you are not part of and prepares outcomes you cannot imagine. There are moments when you feel still, but God is not still. He is aligning hearts, preparing opportunities, shifting circumstances, and opening doors that seemed permanently closed. The unseen world is not silent. It is active with the movement of a Father who loves you with intention and detail. This is why rest is not a waste of time. It is an act of faith that allows God to finish what you cannot. When you trust God with your life, your vision begins to change. You stop looking at the future as a threat and start seeing it as a place where God already stands waiting for you. You stop expecting disaster and start expecting redemption. You stop preparing for disappointment and start preparing for the goodness of God. This shift in perspective is not delusion. It is faith maturing. It is trust settling deeper than your fears. It is hope replacing the internal narrative that used to control your emotions. You also begin to understand that God's timing is not designed to frustrate you. His timing is designed to protect you. Every delay, every closed door, every unexpected turn has purpose. Sometimes God slows you down because He knows the road ahead requires strength you are still developing. Sometimes He redirects you because the path you wanted was not aligned with the future He prepared. Sometimes He allows things to stay hidden because premature exposure would harm you. When you surrender, you begin to trust His timing, not because it makes sense immediately, but because you understand His heart. Trust gives you a different lens. You stop measuring God's faithfulness by how quickly He responds and start measuring it by how consistently He has carried you. You see that the battles you feared were not meant to destroy you. They were meant to shape you. You realize that the moments when you felt alone were the moments God was actually the closest, working silently for your good. You begin to understand that God's silence is never neglect. It is preparation, it is strategy, it is love in motion. This revelation builds a peace inside you that circumstances cannot shake. You start to walk with confidence, not because life is easy, but because you know you are not walking alone. You begin to breathe deeper, sleep better, think clearer, and live with a sense of calm that cannot be explained logically. People may notice a change in you, but they will not understand the depth of it. They will see peace, but they will not know the cost of the battles you fought. They will see calmness, but they will not know the journey that taught you to trust. Only you and God will understand what this surrender has created inside you. This is the miracle of trust. It does not simply change your circumstances, it changes you. And once this change begins, you are never the same again. There comes a moment in every journey of faith when the truth finally reaches the deepest part of your soul. It does not arrive with noise or drama. It arrives with clarity, a clarity so profound that it begins to silence the fears that once controlled your thoughts. This is the moment when you realize that you were never meant to carry your life alone. You start to feel something shift inside you, a quiet strength rising where anxiety once lived. This is not because your circumstances suddenly improved, but because something inside you finally understands that God has been holding you through every moment you thought you were falling apart. This breakthrough is not emotional excitement. It is spiritual awakening. It is the awareness that God has never abandoned you, not even for a second. When you cried silently, He was present. When you tried to be strong for everyone else, He was strengthening you. When you doubted your future, He was preparing it. When you questioned whether you were truly seen, He was watching every detail with the tenderness of a father who refuses to look away. This realization begins to melt the fear you have carried for years. It loosens the grip of the thoughts that used to keep you awake at night. It softens the weight that pressed against your chest. You begin to breathe differently, not because life suddenly became easy, but because you understand that you are not walking through it alone. In this moment of breakthrough, God begins to speak to your heart in a way you can finally hear. He tells you that you do not have to be strong for Him to work. He tells you that your weakness is not a barrier, but a doorway. He tells you that you have been trying to survive when He has been trying to heal you. And for the first time, You start to believe that you are safe in His hands. You start to believe that you do not need to fight every battle with your own strength. You start to believe that surrender is not defeat, it is restoration. This shift reveals something else. You begin to see that the tears you held inside did not go unnoticed. God saw the moments you tried to hide your pain. He saw when you smiled while breaking inside. He saw when you wanted to give up but kept moving because you had no other choice. He saw every night when your thoughts overwhelmed you. And He never judged your weakness. He never punished your doubt. Instead, He held you closer than you realized, waiting for the moment when your heart would soften enough to let Him carry what you could not. This breakthrough also changes the way you see fear. Fear once controlled your decisions, shaped your expectations, and colored your view of the future. Now, it begins to lose its voice. You no longer look at the future as a threat. You no longer assume that something bad is coming. You no longer let worry guide your next step. Instead, a new confidence begins to rise. Not confidence in yourself, but confidence in the one who goes ahead of you. You start to realize that fear never had the final word. Fear was loud, but it was never lord over your life. God was. And He still is. You also begin to understand that the battles you faced were not a sign of abandonment, but preparation. The struggle shaped your faith. The tears softened your heart. The exhaustion taught you to depend on God more than on your own strength. Every moment you thought would break, you actually trained you to trust Him deeply. There is beauty in this revelation. You start to see that nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. Nothing was unnoticed. Everything was shaping you for a deeper walk with God. In this breakthrough moment, your heart begins to receive the truth that peace is not a distant promise, but a present reality. You feel it settling inside you like a gentle weight, comforting and steady. You recognize that God is not asking you to understand everything. He is asking you to trust Him with everything. You understand that you do not have to solve what is beyond you. You do not have to predict what you cannot control. You do not have to fear what has not happened. Your role is simply to remain in His presence. His role is to carry what your heart cannot handle. This breakthrough becomes the turning point in your journey. You stop living from a place of fear and start living from a place of faith. You stop preparing for the worst and start believing God for the best. You stop questioning whether you are loved and start resting in the certainty that you are held. You begin to see yourself not as someone struggling to survive, but as someone being guided and protected by a God who refuses to let your story end in fear. This is where the journey of surrender becomes real. This is where trust becomes natural. This is where peace becomes possible. This is where your heart begins to understand that God has already gone ahead of you. And when you take your next step, you do so not in fear, but in confidence, knowing that the one who walks beside you is the same one who carries you. Prayer of surrender. There comes a moment when words are no longer enough, when explanations cannot reach the part of your soul that aches, and when trying to be strong only reveals how deeply you need God's presence. This is where surrender becomes more than a decision. It becomes a prayer. A prayer not built from perfect phrases, but from honesty. A prayer that rises from the part of you that has been carrying more than it can hold, the part that has been waiting quietly for a place to rest. This prayer is not about impressing God. It is about meeting Him with truth. And when you pray from truth, something shifts in the deepest part of your being. You may have prayed many times before, but this moment is different. This time, you are not asking God to fix your circumstances first. You are asking Him to touch your heart. You are asking Him to reach the places where fear has built walls. You are asking Him to breathe life into the parts of your soul that grew tired from fighting alone. And God receives this prayer with the tenderness of a father who has been waiting for his child to come home. Not to a physical place, but to a posture of trust. This prayer begins with acknowledging your limits, not as weakness, but as truth. You tell God that you have reached the end of what your strength can do. You tell him that your mind has been overwhelmed, your thoughts have been loud, and your heart has been struggling to rest. You tell him that you cannot carry what has been weighing you down. And as you speak these words, something begins to break inside you. Not in a painful way, but in a freeing way. The burden begins to loosen because it is finally being handed into the hands that were always meant to hold it. You then begin to release your fears one by one, not in detail, but in surrender. You release the fear of the future. You release the fear of disappointment. You release the fear of not being enough. You release the fear of losing control. You release the fear of what you cannot predict. Each release feels like opening your hand after holding it tightly for too long. You start to feel space inside your heart where tension once lived. You feel air returning to places that were suffocating under pressure. This is the beginning of spiritual freedom. As you continue to pray, you invite God into the unknown. This may be the hardest part, because the unknown is where your fears usually hide. But now, instead of shrinking back, you are letting God enter the places you cannot see. You tell him that you trust him to lead you, even when the path is unclear. You tell him that you are choosing to walk by faith instead of anxiety. You tell him that his presence means more to you than having every detail figured out. And as these words rise from your heart, God meets you with peace that you cannot explain, the peace that Scripture promises, the peace that guards your heart and mind. Then comes the prayer for clarity, not the clarity of knowing every answer, but the clarity of knowing God is guiding you. You ask him to align your thoughts with his truth, to steady your emotions, and to quiet the noise that has been speaking louder than your faith. You ask him to renew your perspective, to strengthen your spirit, and to remind you that you are not alone, not even for a moment. This clarity does not remove every question, but it removes the fear attached to them. You begin to feel grounded again. You begin to feel held. Your prayer moves into a deeper place when you ask God to restore what worry has drained. You ask him to renew your strength, to rebuild your peace, to soften your heart, and to heal what was wounded by fear. You ask him to revive your hope, to awaken your trust, and to restore your joy. These are not small requests. These are the cries of someone who has been fighting a silent battle for far too long. And God honors these cries because he knows the cost of the struggle you have been carrying. As you pray, you begin to sense that something sacred is happening. The weight that once pressed against your chest begins to lift. The tightness in your thoughts begins to ease. The heaviness on your spirit begins to lighten. This is not imagination. This is the presence of God meeting you in your honesty. This is the peace he promised. This is the rest your soul has been longing for. This is what happens when surrender is no longer a concept, but a moment where your heart opens and God steps in. Your prayer ends with a declaration. Not a loud declaration, but a steady one. You declare that you trust God. You declare that you release what you have been carrying. You declare that your life is in his hands. You declare that you believe he is working in the unseen. You declare that his plan is better than your fear. And as you speak these words, they settle inside you like truth that finally found a place to belong. This final declaration becomes the anchor for the days ahead. It reminds you that you do not walk alone. It reminds you that you are protected, guided, loved, and strengthened. It reminds you that surrender is not the end of your story, but the beginning of a new chapter where peace becomes your foundation and trust becomes your path. Before you leave, write in the comments as your first act of surrender today, God, I surrender my worries to you. As this message reaches its final moments, something inside you has already begun to shift. Not because every answer has arrived, and not because every fear has disappeared, but because your heart has tasted the peace that comes from trusting God with what once felt impossible to release. Even if your circumstances look the same, you are not the same person who began this journey a few minutes ago. There is a quiet strength inside you now, a steadiness that was not there before. You have taken a step that many never take. You have opened the deepest part of your heart to the presence of God, and that alone has already changed the direction of your thoughts and the weight of your emotions. This moment matters. It matters because it proves that your spirit has not given up, even when life felt overwhelming. It matters because it shows that fear did not win. It matters because it reveals that God has been closer to you than you realized. And now, after surrendering what you carried for so long, you stand in a place that feels unfamiliar, yet profoundly safe. This is the place where a new chapter begins, a chapter marked not by the pressure to control, but by the freedom to trust. Your heart may still feel fragile, but fragility is not weakness. Fragility is the space where God's strength settles. It is where He lifts what you cannot carry. It is where He fills the gaps you cannot fill. It is where He speaks clarity into confusion, calm into chaos, and purpose into the moments when life feels uncertain. You are not leaving this message the way you arrived. You are leaving with a renewed understanding of what peace can look like when it is rooted in the presence of God and not in the outcome of your circumstances. As you move forward from this moment, you will notice something new taking shape inside you. Fear will try to return, but it will not have the same authority. Worry will attempt to rise, but it will not control you the way it once did. Your thoughts will try to fall back into old patterns, but now you have truth to confront them. You will not be perfect in this journey of trust, and you are not expected to be. But every time you return to God, every time you choose to pause, breathe, and surrender, you strengthen the foundation that He is building within you. This journey continues long after the video ends. It continues tomorrow morning when you wake up with the choice to declare trust before worry speaks. It continues in the middle of the day when pressure tries to push you back into old habits. It continues at night when your thoughts begin to wander and fear attempts to steal your rest. Every moment becomes another opportunity to practice the surrender that you started here. And each time you choose trust, your heart grows stronger, your faith grows deeper, and your spirit becomes more aligned with the truth that God is carrying you. You may not realize it yet, but God is using this season of your life to prepare you for something greater than what you can see right now. He is shaping your character. He is strengthening your endurance. He is refining your faith. He is teaching you to rely on Him not occasionally, but consistently. And in time, the same areas that once caused you fear will become the very places where you will testify of His faithfulness. What feels heavy now will become part of the story that reveals God's goodness in your life. What feels uncertain now will become a testimony of how God guided you through every step. What feels overwhelming now will soon become a memory that shows how far you have come. As you reflect on everything you have experienced in this message, let your heart settle in this truth. You are not alone, and you will never be alone. God walks with you. God carries you. God strengthens you. God surrounds you with love that does not break under pressure. You have a place in His heart, and nothing you face will ever change that. If this message touched your life, if it brought peace, clarity, or comfort, I invite you to stay with us in this walk of faith. There is a place for you here, a place where your struggles are understood, a place where your faith can grow, a place where you do not walk alone. When you subscribe, you are not just joining a channel, you are joining a journey.